I remember working nights at a convenience store. I started working there in the 90s. Shortly before working there, the owner's son worked the evening shifts. One night, a man frantically rushed in to ask for a knife. He'd been in a car accident and his girlfriend couldn't take her seatbelt off. The owner's son turned around to grab the bagel knife, and by the time he turned back, the dude was dead on the floor. It turns out that his seatbelt had done something to his esophagus, crushed it, I believe. And while adrenaline helped, he suffocated and died right then and there at the register. I didn't know this when I started working there. I later found out after I asked about the things I was experiencing. Here are some of the things that happened while working nights at the convenience store. First, I'd get kicked or poked in the leg or shoulder while nobody was behind me. I'd walk through cold patches that moved throughout the store. There were times I would see the reflection of someone in the cooler door, but when I quickly turned around, there would be nobody there. Countless of times, I felt as if I was being watched while I was in the cooler filling sodas. But it all came back to the knife. The bagel knife. While working by myself on camera, with nobody else there, that knife would be gone the minute I turned around. And then I'd find it back a bit later, sometimes at the exact spot where I left it, or somewhere else. My coworkers there said similar things were happening to them. The overnight shift would have one person working, and often the store was empty. There would be a couple of coworkers who would alternate turns taking the late shift. With everything that took place, I declined to take the overnight shifts. The people who worked that shift sometimes heard whistling, but mostly they heard crying. It turns out the girlfriend was a teacher at my high school. I started talking to him while I worked. I let him know that she was okay. She survived, and that he could let it go. And after a while, things started to calm down. I stopped getting poked, and the knife stayed where I left it. Definitely the most intense experience I've ever had. Back around 2010, I was looking to purchase a house. After years of renting, I figured it was time to finally get a home of my own. With the realtor I met at work as a customer of mine, we visited many prospective houses. The ones I saw were either too small or too big and therefore out of my price range. After a while, I settled on a modest 3-bedroom house in Southgate. I received an address from my realtor as I was driving home from a long day at work. He urged me to check it out that very day so I can decide quickly on putting down an offer. I relented and drove over there. This gated house gave me a good feeling from the moment I saw it from afar. The house was a golden brown color, along with a trim lawn and flowers growing on each side of the porch. I accessed the front gate and decided to walk through the driveway towards the garage and into the backyard. There was a large tree almost reaching the roof of the garage. I stood there for a moment and just listened. The wind and leaves moving pushed me into getting my phone and asking my realtor to come over as soon as possible so I could look inside and make an offer. The house inside looked new as expected. There is a white fall fireplace in the living room that caught my eye. After looking over the dining room and kitchen, I walked towards the bathroom. As I stood just outside looking into the bathroom, I noticed that I was in a hallway where there was a door to my right and another on the left. With the left door being the farthest, I headed towards there. Upon opening the door, I was greeted by a window that had a full view of the backyard with the tree as the centerpiece. I knew I wanted this room to be mine. After taking another moment to admire the view, I turned around and told the realtor to make the offer that very day. Not long after, my mom and I moved in. I recalled getting such a late start moving in that day that we decided to spend the night, even though we didn't have our beds there yet. The next morning, while opening some boxes, I noticed my mom looking unsettled. After asking her what was wrong, she looked at me and half whispered, "Hey, were you able to sleep well last night?" I smiled, already guessing that lying on a carpeted floor was not all that comfortable. I mentioned how I was able to sleep alright with my blanket and pillow. My mom paused and then continued, "Yeah, me too. I finally got comfortable by laying my head down on my pillow, but as I was about to drift into sleep, I felt something push my head forcefully into the floor. I quickly got up and looked around. I was alone. I felt a cold chill run through my back as I heard that. She mentioned that she turned on the lights and tried to go back to sleep after that. Maybe it was a dream where you felt a sort of falling sensation, I told her. That seemed to calm her down, and then we continued the day moving our stuff in. Again, these encounters happened to my mom. For context, I placed a small 32-inch black TV in front of the fall fireplace, and next to it, a wooden small foldable table to hold my Xbox 360. Back then, I enjoyed playing Left 4 Dead 2, as well as the Resident Evil games. On an early evening, I was working while my mom was at home doing laundry. She went into my room to drop off some clean clothes on my bed. As she was walking towards her room, out of the corner of her eye, she was able to spot the living room, specifically the TV and how it contrasted with the white fireplace wall. She suddenly stopped and peered directly at the TV. When I came home, she told me that she could have sworn she momentarily saw an old lady with a white gown right next to the TV behind the console. But when she looked, nothing was there. I replied that it must have been the white console, along with the firewall, that made it seem as if she saw something more. After momentarily looking up at the ceiling, she agreed, and we both never paid any extra thought into it. Next, after a couple of weeks later, on a Saturday night, I went out with a couple of coworkers. About 11:30 p.m., my phone vibrated and noticed it was my mom. She knew I was out and about and would never call unless it was an emergency. So, I answered the call, and my mom was panicked. I saw her again. I was walking out of the bathroom towards the kitchen when I saw that same old lady in white by the TV. Could you please come back home? Please get here. I felt my heart drop into my stomach as I heard the labored breathing between her words. I was at a bar at the time and said my goodbyes to my friends before heading back. About half an hour later, I entered through the back door and found Mom standing close by with her back against the wall. All she could do was point towards the living room. I slowly made my way there and saw nothing out of the ordinary. But as I walked towards the TV and console, I felt a sudden unease that made me look over my shoulders. I sensed a sudden jolt of cold cascading all over my back. I turned around and invited my mom to have a late night bite away from the house. The next strange incident, which happened to me, took place on a cool Friday night in May of 2012. I decided to stay home and spend time with my mom. After dinner, she suggested we see a movie. With no interesting movies on TV, I reminded her that I have the film What Lies Beneath on DVD. We must have watched that film at least 5 times. I have always been fascinated with the paranormal films, and this one film made me feel disconcerted at times. Naturally, my mom became ecstatic at the movie choice. I then searched my entire room and couldn't find it. I then went to my car by going through the kitchen exit, where I had to open a white interior door, followed by a black metal door. After searching, the DVD was not in my car. As I came back inside, I closed the black door and entered the living room, visibly frustrated. As I gave the bad news to Mom, I sat down on the couch, right next to her, and stared at the TV. At that exact moment, I swear I saw someone peer in from the open kitchen white door. I quickly sprang up and stared at the door. I told Mom that I saw someone peer in their head to watch us. I went directly to the kitchen door and confirmed that the black metal door was locked. About a month later, my mom left to visit family abroad and left the house all to myself. There were nights where I could come home at night ranging from 9 p.m. to 12 a.m. I would enter my house from that back door that led to the kitchen. Every single time I would come into the kitchen, I felt as if something was watching me from the dark living room. Feeling the chills, I would not look towards the living room. Instead, I would reach over to the light switch and flip it on, and then rush to my room. I told my brother about this feeling, and within a week, came over to keep me company. I would come home to the lights on with the smell of burnt food from my brother's cooking. There would be nights where we'd stay up late watching movies, in the dark. One night around 2:30 in the morning, I turned on the lights in the living room. After turning off the TV, I turned around to face my brother and began discussing the movie we just watched. He was standing in front of the hallway that led to my mom's room to the right, the bathroom towards the center right, and my room on the left. I took my eyes off my brother to look at my phone, and as soon as I looked up at him, a black shadow sprinted from left to right, towards my mom's room. I just pointed behind him, not saying a word. I just saw something, I finally stammered. My brother just looked behind him and went towards the semi-dark hallway. He went towards Mom's room and grabbed the doorknob. It was locked. He just looked back at me and shook his head. We promptly said goodnight to each other and quickly went to our own rooms. One last incident that happened while living at that house took place on the night when my brother needed to go to see his daughter near the city of Riverside. He left around 7 p.m. and mentioned he would be returning later that night. It must have been 11:30 when I got up from the couch to go pee. As I was doing my business, I sighed and stared forward, focusing on the white wall just above the toilet. Everything was silent, until so suddenly there was a loud bang behind the wall. What horrified me so much was that on the other side of that wall was my room. I ran to my room, and after flipping on the lights, I noticed that it was empty. Who banged the wall? It had to be my brother, trying to prank me. I went into the living room and called him. After a few rings, he picked up. "Hey, are you already here?" I asked. After a few seconds of silence, my brother quietly responded, "I just left Riverside. I should be there in 2 hours." After telling him to hurry home, I got the hell out of the living room and locked myself in my room. I remember living out my childhood in South Central Los Angeles during the 80s and parts of the 90s. I vividly remember walking through an alley on my way to elementary school on 75th Street. And as a flashbulb memory, I recall walking outside my home only to discover black smoke invading the blue sky from all four directions in 1992 during the riots. Having rough times living in a tough neighborhood didn't prevent me from having a happy childhood. Along the street my mom and two little brothers lived in, there were 3 houses. We lived in the last house, the smallest house. Around 87, we moved into the next house over. We were all happy to live in a bigger house. The only scary things I saw were the horror films on TV. Since my mom loved watching them, naturally, I did too. However, she always made a point to emphasize that we should always fear the living, not the dead. During our time in that bigger house, we were robbed twice while not being home. And for good measure, we scared off a group of masked men trying to break into our back door. Years later, after moving out, my mom told me a story that didn't involve encountering the living. At least, that is what we concluded. The following will be told from her perspective. This occurrence took place around June of 1991, between 2 and 3 a.m. No one else was in the house besides my 3 boys and me. Since I would almost always have trouble sleeping, I would make the habit of staying up while watching my boys sleep in their room. On this evening, everything was silent except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. As I was nodding off to sleep, I distinctly heard 3 heavy footsteps, followed by a loud creaking sound the kitchen door made when it swings open. Thinking that someone broke into our house, I immediately shot up to my feet and slammed the door next to the kitchen shut. After locking the deadbolt, I laid my head against the door and listened for any additional movement. Except for the ticking of the clock, there was complete silence. After about 5 minutes, I decided to slowly open the door and found a lit kitchen as I left it. And on top of everything, the kitchen door that leads to the living room was closed shut. No matter how much oil was added to the hinges of it, the kitchen door would always make a loud creaking sound. It got to the point where we all got used to the sound. This night was no different. Even though I was half going to sleep, I heard that same creaking sound. I looked around the kitchen one more time before dashing behind the fridge and turning off the lights before quickly heading back to the room and shutting the door. Years later, I wonder what happened and still can't figure it out. Perhaps it was a mind trick, but I can honestly say that what happened that night was an experience I have never had since.